In today's episode, we're speaking to Brian Will. Brian Will is a serial entrepreneur and an industry-leading business and sales management consultant. During the course of his career, Brian has created or co-created 7 very successful companies in 4 different industries. These companies were worth over $500 million at their peak. He has also done multiple turnaround projects for companies from startups to Fortune 500 and helped those organizations drive billions of dollars in sales. His multifaceted background gives him the ability to understand and teach agile processes and principles and therefore he actually himself was at one point a dropout from college, and he went on to become a multimillionaire. Let's speak to Brian and find out how he changed his life by changing his mindset. Let's find out. And if you want to upgrade your mindset, then click on the link www.millionairefoundations.com and watch my free training. Welcome. This is Gull, your money mindset expert. And today I'm so excited. I have Brian Willard with us. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, Gull, how are you?
I am super excited to be speaking to you, Brian. Brian, everyone's heard your intro. They know how fantastic you are, but please, in your own words, tell everybody what it is that you do.
Well, today I am a business coach consultant. I run a mastermind organization. That's what I do for fun. Outside of that, I own several businesses. I own a small restaurant chain. I own a real estate company. I have a little technology company. My history is in doing venture capital and private equity deals. So long business history, but what I do today is work with young entrepreneurs and helping them to grow their business.
Fabulous. So this leads me on to our, the topic for today, which is your life journey. Because I was looking, when we were talking to you off camera, you have had quite a journey yourself. There's a book that I can see the backdrop of a book from behind you, which is Dropout to Multimillionaire. Talk us through your journey. How does a dropout become a multimillionaire? Because I know this is not the case, but a lot of people have this misguided idea. In order for you to be wealthy, you have to go to college, you have to have a degree, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't have an education behind you, then you're going to end up, working on minimum wage. Talk us through your journey. How did you become a multimillionaire?
My story goes back to my childhood. So I was raised in an abusive home. And when I say abusive, I mean every kind of abuse you can think of. I failed out of high school when I was 16 years old. Managed to get back in. I graduated with a 1.2 GPA, which is basically a D. Got kicked out of the house after I graduated, didn't have any place to go. So I joined the military. I did a year on active duty. I did 4 years in the Air Force, 4 years in the Army, all in the National Guard. So I did the military thing. I got out of that, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was trying to hold jobs. I couldn't hold any jobs. Ended up as a busboy at a restaurant chain here in the U.S. called Applebee's. My future wife was a waitress and I was a busboy, and that's how we met. So this was my story at 21 years old. Broke, busboy, no future, no clue what I was going to do, kept getting fired. But I was that kid. Now, my grandfather was a 3rd grade educated dropout who ended up owning a bunch of businesses when he was older. And I used to spend my childhood with my grandfather. And I think it imprinted on my brain this concept of doing your own thing and living your own life and doing what you want to do. So I got this idea that I would start my first business, and having really no education and no discernible job skills, I became a landscaper because I figured anybody could mow grass and dig holes. And so that's what I did. And then I built that up over about 7 years, and we had 7 franchises in the Atlanta area. And then the entire thing collapsed. My world collapsed. I lost all my money, my house, my cars. My child had to have open heart surgery. I was a mess at 29 years old. So that's how I got started in life. And then I went on and started building other businesses from there.
All right. So let's break this down. What kind of mindset did you have? Well, how did you instill the self-belief that you could have? I mean, when people think of having business, they think of having one business. They don't understand the concept of franchise. And, doing that in your 20s it's quite, amazing. What prompted you to expand your business and make it into a franchise and, and develop it in that regard?
So, Gull, I consider myself to be ambitiously lazy. And what that means is I'm willing to work really hard for a short period of time so that I can not have to work so hard later without sacrificing my income. And understanding I was a angry young man with a chip on my shoulder who didn't listen to people and didn't want to be told what to do. So I tried to do everything myself and tried to do it my own way, which was the cause of my demise, by the way. But I just knew I wanted more, right? When I was a kid who took out the Sears catalog and circled everything I wanted, you know, and it was almost everything in the catalog. I don't know if they have Sears catalogs over in the UK, but they do here.
We have catalogs here, so I know what you're talking about. We don't have Sears catalog, but we do have catalogs. I know what you're talking about.
So that was what I did as a kid. So there was always something in me that wanted more. This just was innate in who I was. And so when I went into business, it was always about getting bigger and making more money. And unfortunately, I made a lot of money and then spent more than I had. And again, another big lesson I learned in that big failure, in that first failure, which has carried with me the rest of my life, by the way. There's all the lessons in success happen in failure, as long as you learn from the failure.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
As long as you learn from the failure. If you don't learn, you're just going to make the same mistakes again.
So what happened? You say you've lost it all. Your child had open heart surgery. Is that what took your mind off from your business? What caused your business to collapse?
So I made two critical errors early on that again, I teach people today, and I also learned myself. The first one was the majority of my income came from one client.
Okay.
And that is a huge no-no in any business, because when that client decided to stop using me, my entire business collapsed. All my employees, my investments, my equipment, my debt. So that's a huge one. Never invest or allow one client to be the majority of your revenue stream. The second one was because I was that kid who got kicked out of high school and failed and didn't know what to do. When I started making a little bit of money, I started spending it, and I was spending every dollar I made. And we were doing okay, but I also had 2 mortgages on 2 houses, 3 car payments, a payment on my motorcycle, credit card payments. And so we were basically living paycheck to paycheck, even though at the time, and this is 30 years ago, you know, I was making $100,000 a year, which was a lot of money back then, but I was also spending 102 or 105. So I had nothing left over. And unfortunately, when tough times hit, if you haven't prepared yourself properly, you're going to take a fall. And that's exactly what I did.
Okay. I completely understand that, because it's becoming wealthy. It's not about the amount of money you make. It's about the amount of money you keep and how you invest and how you allow money to grow for you. So that's a different skill set. Making money is one skill set, and then growing wealthy and making wealth, being wealthy is another skill set. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Right. So what happened? I mean, how did you pick yourself up again once you've lost the houses, the cars, and everything, and your child's in critical stage? How did you pick yourself up again?
You don't have any choice, right? So I always say when everything falls apart, you have a choice to, in my case, man up or give up. And I didn't have a choice. I had a daughter, I had a wife, I had to take care of my family. So I went back to what I call me and a shovel and a truck, and I started doing landscaping by myself again, as opposed to having all the employees in offices. And then a friend of mine came along and he said, "Hey, why don't you sell insurance?" And I said, "Why in the world would I ever sell insurance? What a terrible job. What a terrible field to get into. I mean, I'm not a salesperson." And it took him about 6 months to finally convince me by showing me bigger and bigger commission checks. And finally I said, "Okay, I'll sell insurance because it seems like you're making a lot of money." And so I started selling insurance with him at night while I was doing landscaping during the day. And within 6 weeks, I was 50% of the production in this entire insurance office. And it turned out I was really good at sales, something I never knew. Like it was a skill set I'd always had apparently, but didn't know I had it. And so I thought, well, I'm good at sales and I can sell insurance. So I quit working for the agency and I started my next insurance agency on my own. And I developed a system back then that had never been done before, which was selling insurance over the phone. Today, you can't even imagine having to have an insurance agent come out to your house and visit with you and make you do all this paper. Today we do the internet. Well, back then I just did it over the phone. And within a year and a half, I'd created the first direct-to-consumer call center in the health insurance space in the country. The dot-com boom was happening in 1999, and I got acquired by a venture capital firm. Out of the blue, they literally called me and said, "We heard about you. We want to buy you." And so that was my introduction into the venture capital world. And then my business and life took off from there.
Fabulous. But to get there, you had to learn the skills over time. So here's my next question to you, and this is the case with a lot of people. When they fail, I mean, I'm using the word failure very lucidly because I think there's no such thing as a failure. They're all lessons, and as long as you're willing to take from them. But let's just use the word failure for the time being. And I have someone in mind when I'm saying this. This individual who's very smart, very, he did lots of things, and he, pulled himself through university, got a degree, and then he went on to have his business. And that business did really, really well for a certain number of years, about 6-7 years, and then it collapsed. Mm-hmm. And once the business collapsed, he just never got out from it again. And he too had a daughter, but she wasn't sick, of course. And his wife was, became the main breadwinner. The marriage collapsed. He went into depression, and he's finally just coming out of it now. So I know this for a fact that you said I didn't have a choice, but you had a certain mindset that people can learn from, because the fact that you failed once does not necessarily mean you're going to fail again. How do you say, okay, you know what? I've done it. I've lost it. It doesn't matter. I'll start again. Having that courage to get up and do it again and face adversity, face people's opinions, and all of that stuff. How did you do that? Where did you get the courage from, and how did you talk to yourself to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to start my own? Because it would be very easy for you to stay with that insurance company and just make commissions rather than say, I'm leaving, I'm going to start my own insurance agency. That takes a certain kind of mindset to get there. How did you get there?
That's an interesting question. And I liken it back to something I talk about in my first book. And I think people who go through adversity, particularly as a child or a teenager, I say that they go one of three routes, right? So if you're in an abusive home, the first route is you continue the pattern and you become an abuser, yes, right? The second pattern is you let it defeat you and you become basically nothing, and you just hole up and you're a victim and you're never. And the third way you can go, and I find this in a lot of business CEOs, athletes, entrepreneurs, and artists, is you take that pain and you take that trauma and you use it as fuel to push you forward. Because I was so angry at what I thought it was. I had to prove that I had to prove to everybody who thought I was a loser. I had to prove to everybody who thought I would never make it that I could actually do something. I could actually make something out of my life. Now, here's the funny thing, Gull, and I know you know this. Eventually, you're going to figure out that the people that you're fighting against, that you think you have to prove something to, aren't the real problem. The real problem is you. You have to prove to yourself that you're not that person that you think that they think you are, right? I always say when you meet your enemy, you find out that your enemy is actually you. Yeah. And that's when you get to that point, that's where you can make that breakthrough and you can start moving on. But I use trauma as a fuel, right? And I always call it my anger box. I push all that trauma and those problems into this little box that I hide in my subconscious. And when I need it, I always call it cracking the lid. I crack the lid on that anger box, and I let a little of that out. I get really intense and I move forward. And I know when I can do that. But there's also danger in there, because I know if I open it too much and let too much out, then I become a raving lunatic, and that's not who I want to be. Yeah. So you have to control that anger box, I call it, with that trauma, allow it to fuel you to move forward. And why people go down those three routes, I don't know. I think you do a lot of work in this area, and what you do is clearing those issues up for people. But I don't know why I went down that route. I just did. I guess I was one of the lucky ones that was able to use that as fuel and not let it destroy me.
I mean, I completely agree with what you just said. And I think it's true. I think it's how you view things. It's not allowing the circumstances to make your decisions. It's making your decisions regardless of circumstances and just working through them, and not thinking you're lucky or unlucky, and just creating your own luck through sheer hard work. I think there is an element of mindset that, the more positive mindset you have, the luckier you get. As simple as that. It's law of attraction 101. But going back to this idea, I mean, I went through a very, very, very difficult childhood myself. And I was severely dyslexic. And I didn't know I was dyslexic. I found out I was dyslexic at the end of my first year of law degree, right? And by then I was a top student. Who knew? And I remember now in hindsight, it made sense, because until I was 11 years old, until high school, I couldn't read a full sentence of, literally I couldn't even read a full sentence. I, had to stutter and read, but I just thought that was normal. And I studied extra hard because now I was proving to someone at that time as well. At that time, I was trying to prove to my father, who was this multimillionaire, that I didn't need his money. I could make money myself. And my only way of making money was through education. So my brother went one route. He went the delinquent route. And I went the other route of being the top overachiever. It doesn't matter how hard I had to work. And I worked extra hard. All I remember doing when my childhood was study. That's all I ever did. I didn't do anything else. Because for the same reason, the drive was there to prove myself. It's only when you become an adult and you start looking through your past traumas, when you start looking through your issues, you realize the only person you're trying to prove something to is to yourself. You are your own worst enemy. And you, as soon as you turn that around and become your own best friend, your biggest cheerleader, that the fuel you're talking about, which is coming from anger, can come from self-love, which is a lot healthier and a lot more productive. And it takes you a lot further than where you would otherwise be. And I love the fact that you say every failure is a lesson. It's not a failure, it's just a lesson. It's an expensive lesson, but it's a lesson nonetheless.
But I will tell you that people hear this phrase all the time, and I want to correct this phrase. People say you have to fail to succeed, right? Fail fast, succeed fast. And that makes me cringe every time I hear it, because failure leads to failure. The only way failure ever leads to success is if you learn from the failure. And there are people that in your life that always fail. They fail over and over and over. They can't seem to win for it's because they're not learning from the failure. It's the learning from the failure that leads to the success, not the failure, right? I tell business people, when you fail, you do a post-failure analysis. You figure out what you did wrong and never do that again. But if you don't go through that learning phase, then you're doomed to repeat what you've already done. So it's the learning. And I'll give you one more concept. And this is, I talk to entrepreneurs about this one a lot too. The reality is we all start at a different place in life.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
My first book was called Starting Life at Zero, right? Now, my children, they have a wealthy father, they have master's degrees, advanced education. If they go into business, they're going to start way up here, right? They don't need to worry about learning all these lessons. Me, I started way down here. Everybody starts at a different level. You can succeed at whatever it is you want to succeed as long as you do two things. As long as you understand where you're starting, and that wherever you start is going to require you to learn a different set of lessons or more lessons along the way. And the example is, if there's 100 lessons and you're starting at 50, you only have to learn 50. If you're starting at 0, you got to learn all 100, and you're going to have to go through them, and you're going to have to learn them. And that's just the cards you were dealt in life. So don't quit, be persistent, deal with it, and move on, and you will succeed at whatever level you want to succeed at. You just might have to do more work than somebody else. And you can't get mad at the people who are starting at 50. It is what it is.
It is what it is. I'm going to go back to both of those concepts. One about the failure. I think that reminded me of a story from Bob Proctor. I think it was Bob Proctor, may he rest in peace. He mentioned about a story when, if you have your house burns down and have all your valuables in there, but you knew there was a diamond in there. As soon as you're able to go back into that to the locality, you're going to go and search for that diamond, aren't you? Because the diamond's not going to burn, so you're going to go and look for the diamond. That's how we need to approach our so-called failures, because there's a lesson in there which is worth diamonds. And this is what we need to do. I remember taking that on board. I mean, I'm one of those people, and I I'm just naively optimistic about everything in the world. And I literally I'm one of those people who does learn through failures. There's nothing that I've learned in my life I could say I've learned from other people. I know the lesson and I will still make the mistakes, and then I'll learn the lesson. And that's how I do it, right? So investments, everything I've made, I've lost first and then I made again. But I'm one of those people who goes digging for diamonds. I go and find, okay, what could I have done differently? How can I do it differently? And how can I have a mindset around it differently? So this is what I want to reassure people, that even though they can see someone like you and I, and we have multiple businesses, and they're in 7 figures or whatever else, I'm one of those people that still make mistakes. And I'm okay
Always.
with making mistakes, because I know I'm not trying to make a mistake. I'm trying to do the best I can in the circumstances that I have at hand. If it doesn't go in the way I want it and I see it as a failure or a mistake, I can learn from it. So that's one mindset, how you think of it. That's one thing. The second thing about what you said, I love that you said that, because people, we are all starting out, even when we are, even if we have so-called similar lifestyle. And I'm going to give you an example here. So when I was starting out in my school, I grew up in East London, and it was heavily populated with brown people of color, black and brown, so forth. And even then, this is going back in the early 90s. If you were a person of color, you were at disadvantage. Simple as that. Okay, so if you're a man, you have an advantage. If you're a woman, you have you're a bit more disadvantaged than men. If you're a woman, if you're a man of color, you have disadvantage. If you're a woman of color, you have more disadvantage. And then I grew up as a dyslexic person on top of that. Right, so we all start at different levels, and I remember that. And my brother, he was a brown boy, he should have more advantage than me, because he had more freedom than I did, and he has more liberties than I did. Yet he did not go down and wasn't able to be as successful as I am. But even though he started up ahead of me, and now I'm looking back, I have colleagues or people in my year, they're white, female, Caucasian, everything was going for them, and I'm way above in terms of financial success. Otherwise, I can't say personal success, but financial success, because I chose a different route. I made some decisions, and I didn't allow their advantage to make me feel inferior. I just said, okay, they're there, I'm there, I can catch up. And I think it's how you view things. If you understand that somebody, some part of the world is below you, and somebody, some part of the world is ahead of you, stop competing with people and how fast and quickly they arrive somewhere. You just need to be aware of where you are and accept life is not fair. This is one thing that I teach my children. I mean, it's a concept that my mother used to say, life isn't fair, but God is. So remember that if you, as long as you're happy and sincere and you know where you're going, because you have been given a certain hand, certain things, certain skill sets and abilities, and other people have some other abilities, doesn't mean that you are any inferior. You just have a different path, and you can still get to wherever you want to get to, depending on whatever you desire. I mean, I have no desire to be a singer. That's the reason why I don't have the singing skills, but I do have a desire to be a public speaker, so I am a public speaker. Does that make sense? So it's this, you are given the skill sets to accomplish life purpose. But if I start competing myself with somebody who's swims Olympic, that's ridiculous, because I don't have the desire, nor the skill set, nor the body structure for it. Right.
So here's an interesting question I'll pose back to you.
Yeah.
So, and I see this a lot, and it was something my stepbrother said to me early on, and I'll relate it back to you. You and your brother raised in the same house, right? Yeah. Same parents.
Yeah.
Basically the same upbringing.
Yeah.
Two divergent paths.
Completely. Wait.
Why?
Yeah, we are as different as chalk and cheese. And this is exactly mindset things. When my brother, because I'll give you a bit background to my story. My father I would be a billionaire in today's day and age, right? When I was 5 and my brother was 6, my father remarried, and he had the full intention of keeping a mom too, because in Islam you like multiple wives. So you have to up to 4 wives. My mother had chosen not to stay with my father because of that reason. My father played the financial card, and he said, if you don't stay, I won't give you money. The old trick in the bag. My mother left Pakistan and came back to UK. We were born in UK, and we were born in Manchester, but we moved to London. Now, my brother saw my father's success and my father's abilities. Like, oh, my father's so rich, my mother's so poor. We literally went from riches to rags, to the point we didn't have cutlery. We literally using, the plastic containers which we walked food in. I, on the other hand, is a completely different mindset. So my father can do it, I can do it. It was a mindset that came in at an early age. My brother took one aspect and took on the victim mentality at a young age. I took on that, you know what, my father can do it and I can do it. I don't need my father, I can do it. I can do it for my mom.
Why?
So the why?
Was it an event? Did something tragic? Is there a trauma event that caused that? Or is it nature or nurture? I talk about this a lot.
I think this is where it comes up with, it's an interesting question, because I think because my mother's teaching was exactly the same for both of us. What we took away from it was very different. So I would say this definitely comes into your natural instincts in terms of it must be nature, because it's exactly the same teaching, exactly the same circumstances. We literally are so different even to this day. We are different as chalk and cheese. But I went I had to be successful. There's no way that I wasn't going to be. And I also had the idea that I'm going to do it the right way. He wanted the things as well. He wanted the fast cars, whatever. Then he went the juvenile delinquent way, by stealing and other things and stuff. And so it has to be. I think from if I look in my household, and if I look at my brother and myself, exactly the same teaching from the same woman, exactly the same circumstances, and the age was the same as well. Difference between 5 and 6 and 6 and 7. There's not much difference. It definitely has to be nature. It's not nurture, because nurturing's been the same from the same woman. It was just these two individuals. One decided that way is the best, which is, I'm gonna prove to my father that I can do it this way. And my brother going, well, I can't get it, I'll get it the other way, and he went the wrong path. So I would definitely say there's an element of nature involved, because it's the mindset. Because I've never thought about this, never discussed it before. You can't teach a 5-year-old, 6-year-old to think in a particular way, or think very differently, because they both have the same teaching from the same woman about being God conscious and being religious and being everything else. If we're both receiving the same exact information, yet I'm interpreting it one way and he's interpreting another way at a young age, but there could be an element of nurture as well, because being a girl, I did not go out as much. He, being a boy, did go out, and then we grew because we moved from a very rich into a very, very, very poor environment. His external environment had a bigger influence on him, so that could be it. The external environment had a bigger influence on him, whereas because I stayed indoors, I was a girl, my mother had a bigger influence on me. So there could be a bit of both nature and nurture. That's interesting. That's the first time I ever thought about it like that.
Now, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Is that something, and your mother, I've got 2 children, is that something you can identify and potentially help overcome through their childhood, teenage years? Or is that something you can overcome at this point, right? Like when they're an adult and they're 30 years old, is it possible to go back and overcome whatever limitation or whatever it is that caused them to go down that route to bring them back to a different type of lifestyle? Is that possible?
100%. That's exactly what I teach. You can start off at any moment in time, because you can first, the way to go overcome this is, one, recognize that there is a difference. And the person I'm talking about, my brother, he has changed himself. He's now, he won't listen to his sister, because sister, that's not going to happen.
Of course not.
Right. But he started off listening to Tony Robbins. He listens to Jim Rohn's old CDs and stuff. And he has started listening to a lot of motivational speaking, a lot of mindset thinking. So his mindset's changed. And funny enough, when his mindset started changing, guess what? His life experiences started changing. He's now remarried, and he's now picking up himself, and his now business is coming up again. And he's working on his life, and his life is coming back in order again. And I see it so beautifully, because as soon as he started working on his mindset, his life started shifting. So this is for anybody who's listening. Doesn't matter where you are, what you've done in the past. There's no such thing as my life is over. You can start today to start a new beginning. But the very first thing before you take action is to work on your mindset. And as long as you do, and you can, and I teach a concept called rewriting your stories. We need to emotionally disconnect with our past traumas. And this is something that I do. I help you to go back to those childhood memories, because that trauma that you suffered as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old stays with you unless you work through it, and it will dictate your life. That 5-year-old version of you, Brian, is going to dictate how you behave when you're 55, 65, 75.
Without question.
So you go back and you speak to the 5-year-old version of you, and you help that child let go of that trauma by rewriting your story. This is not fabrication. We're not making a false memory for you. We are just disconnecting from the emotional trauma. So once you've disconnected from the emotional trauma, what happens is the memory remains, but the emotional charge diffuses. So you're no longer angry, upset, and frustrated and sad over it. And therefore, you no longer hold that, that cord next to you. You're no longer being held victim to that memory, and you're able to progress further in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, and 70s. And I've seen people in their 70s still holding on to traumas from when they were children. If you don't work through it, this is not some magic wand that at a certain age you let go of old traumas. This is something that you have to do actively. Work on your past self and give yourself space and the emotional space to be able to go through it. If you are upset as a child over, so for example, I'll give you a small example. when I was 5, my brother, bullied me and took my ice cream. That sounds ridiculous right now. Like, what difference does that make? But to a 5-year-old, that's the whole world, So you have to, go and reassure the 5-year-old, it's okay. Your brother wasn't being mean. He was just being, he was just playing for you, whatever. And you reassure that child, and you take away the anger towards a brother or the sibling, whoever it is, and you help that, you end up understand that one memory could result in you having a really antagonistic relationship with that sibling of yours, and not understand why. Because at that point in time, he made you feel threatened, made you feel lonely, and you were scared and angry with your sibling. That one memory has been dictating how you've proceeded in terms of the relationship you have with your sibling. And most of the things I'm talking about, I've done this for myself, because I had a very antagonistic relationship with my brother. And I cleared all my past traumas with him to now having a very, very, very loving relationship. He and I are very, very close. And he's my rock and I'm his rock. But these are things where you have, as a child, you have to work through. Does that make sense?
Yes, but can you identify them in your own children and help them work through it before it affects the rest of their life?
I think that's a great question. I think, but the short answer is yes, you can. But I think it's more complicated than that, because I think the idea would be, if you are self-aware, then you would help your children to grow in the most loving, nurturing environment ever. If that's not possible, as in the case in my case, because I've had not one but 2 emotionally abusive marriages, then your children also go through the emotional abuse with you when you are going through those times. Mm-hmm. I've been working with my children, and I've been, I won't say brainwashing them, but I would say programming them positively in the right direction from an early age. And I'll give you an example of that. So my daughter has seen that I had not one, but 2 abusive marriages, 2 extremes, one being physically abusive, the other being emotionally, financially, and, heavily abusive that way, and narcissistic. I did not want my daughter to grow up with the idea that men are awful or men are horrible. So I have been programming her from a young age to have a very healthy image of men. And at that time, my brother wasn't a healthy image either. He was lost and going through depression. I purposely spoke positively about men around her, around, the uncles or whatever else, and the people around her. And I have given both my son and my daughter really positive role models from they're not in our immediate family, but cousins and relatives and friends of fathers, purposely for it. So you can help your children work through those traumas, as long as you identify yourself, because they won't be able to identify when they're younger. As they get and when they're older, you are not there responsible to identify for them. You need to give them tools to identify themselves, so because this is a lifelong process. But as long as they grow up healthy, knowing the knowledge, they have the tools to be able to deal with whatever life throws their way. And life is going to throw their things away. Yeah, that's going to happen. Yeah. Let's not beat the bush about it. They're never going to have a happy life for the rest of life. They're going to have the ups and downs. They're going to have their share of failures and heartaches. As long as they have the tools to work through them, and the ability to process through their emotions, no trauma, no setback will keep them low. They may be low at one point in time, but they won't stay there, because they'll get up, brush themselves off, and carry on going. But this is what the tools we give them as children.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And it being the other way around. But anyway, we'll wrap that up on that point. So just give a summary again, Brian, for anybody listening. What advice would you give to someone who feels, I don't have the right education, I don't have the right contacts, I don't know how, I'm not lucky enough, how can I possibly succeed in business?
I tell people this all the time. I say, look, again, I don't care where you are today. I don't care if you grew up in an abusive home, so did I. I don't care if you have health problems, so did I. I don't care if you have bad credit, so did I. I don't care if you have no education. I failed out of high school. I don't care where you're at. You can still succeed at any level you want to succeed if you're willing to learn the number of lessons required and not quit along the way. You can have anything you want. It's just a matter of moving forward, learning the lessons, and then getting there. That's it.
Perfect. And on that note, we're going to wrap this up. So, Brian, tell us, how can we connect with you? Where can you find you on the internet?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's www.brianwillmedia.com. brianwillmedia.com. My podcast is there. My books are there. Everything's there.
Wonderful. If you're listening to us on the podcast, remember the links for Brian will be in the show notes. And if you watch us on YouTube, then down below in the description section, we'll have all the links for Brian too. Go check him out. He's one amazing person. Go pick up his books as well. And I know for a fact that I'm going to be buying one of his books to start reading a bit more and get to know more about his mindset. But today, Brian, thank you so much for being our guest. We have to have you back on Money Talkies. But today, thank you so much for an interesting conversation.
I appreciate it, Gull. It was awesome.
And thank you for listening to me and Brian today. I will be back with another amazing guest, another Friday feature, finding out how they change their life by changing their mindset. Until the next time we meet, this is Gull signing off. Take care and bye for now.